for the introduction. Thank you all for being present today. Before I begin, I'd like to thank the Dunedin Fine Art Center, its entire staff, the board, its donors, and all of its volunteers for helping make this one of the crown jewels of our Tampa Bay art community. So, also, a thank you to the Sterling Society for putting this series together. Sometimes art and the creation of art can be a little mysterious. I have a feeling that most of you have had a hand in making some artwork, but this is a really good chance for everyone to get a peek behind the curtain, if you will. So thank you very much, Sterling Society. Today I'm here, as mentioned, to talk about abstraction. I'm going to weave in and out of my own experiences with abstraction, the inspirations behind the creation of my work, and along the way, as Estelle was reading, you can see that we're probably going to be going down a few rabbit holes, but we'll be coming back up for air. And I'm going to end by touching briefly on our shared future by talking about a few kind of broad concepts of willingness and communion. So we'll get started today. I have a sort of interactive start. I'd just like, with a show of hands, if you would please let me know if you feel that this painting is abstract. Yeah, basically, okay, kind of, yeah, all right. Okay. So most of us are basically yes. This one, also a show of hands? No. Most definitely not. Okay. So when we're discussing the abstract art, I think it's important that we examine the definitions that we're using. The definition of abstract, in this case. We'll use the Oxford Dictionary. And, according to the Oxford Dictionary, abstract art is relating to or denoting art that does not attempt to represent external reality, but rather seeks to achieve its effect using shapes, colors, and texture. So keeping this in mind, we'll go back to our Picasso. And quite clearly, the artist is referencing external reality. So although we all felt that it was abstract, clearly this is a borderline piece, which I think you all felt anyway. So then let's look again at the Foro still life here. This is by Maria van Oosterwijk. She was a painter from the Northern European Baroque period. During this period, there's a lot of still lifes that were made where the objects in the still life were symbols for something else, for ideas or moral values. For example, pick up where I'm here, when they used red to make their flowers to symbolize martyrdom. When they used white flowers, it would denote innocence. And this particular painter would always include this red admiral butterfly in her paintings as a symbol of Christ's resurrection. So of course for the time period this is very important, and this paintings were at the time a way to transmit values and ideas. And so in this way, this painting, although it does reference external reality in a very representational manner, it is also in its own abstract, since it's not really about the flowers or the textures. Those things are all used as vehicles for communication. So what I'd like to do is sort of re-examine or reapproach our definition of abstraction, or Oxford's definition of it anyway. And we'll go back to the Latin root of abstract, abstractus, meaning to draw away from. And if we combine that with the term that is used to that's used in literature, an abstract is a summary of the contents of a book, article, or speech. So when we combine these kind of ideas, we can come up with a modified definition of abstraction, and this is not abstract art, but abstraction is in general, is a removal of content from its original context to simplify, generalize, or summarize in order to facilitate our understanding of the content. Page 2 here. So with this modified definition line, we can see that painting and all art, in fact, is abstract to a degree. Each work displays a different degree of abstraction. Some obviously completely abstract, which we will label as non-representational, non-objective. There's different terms for that. All the way to the other side of the spectrum, which would be completely representational. So much of the art movements in the last century or so have kind of gone through these different pathways trying to define itself and trying to find purpose and relevance for art in a rapidly changing landscape, social landscape, psychological landscape. Of course, one pathway was Impressionism, and another pathway sort of around the same time was Cubism. And both of these movements were exploring the ways in which we see. And so, of course, Seurat used all of these dots, where the dots were pure color and mixed together with our eyes. We see these sort of what's called local colors. Monet, of course, this is another borderline abstraction, realistic painting. But again, the Impressionists were very much obsessed with light and its effect. And we have the Cubists, who are exploring how we see shapes in space. And not only shapes in space, but shapes in space over time. So, there's this example of Cézanne, where he's painting a still life, and then you would move a little bit and paint it from a different angle, slightly different angle. And if you see his paintings, sometimes the table lines, they don't match up. And that was on purpose, because we all move through space. And of course, Picasso here, just breaking up the face into planes and the body into planes. And then really getting into some very, very abstract, non-representational territory here. Another pathway was concerned with the way we think, and includes Dadaism, conceptualism. So the very famous example here is Marcel Duchamp's fountain. This pathway, over the course of the last century, has really helped us realize that our definition of things is completely dependent on the context that it's in. So here, our urinal is art, because it's on a pedestal in a museum. And this clearly is not art. Or for most of us, anyhow. Now we have this by René Magritte, the treachery of images. This idea that this is not a pipe, but it's a pipe. It's a picture of a pipe. So what power do images have? And again, talking about representation and abstraction and ideas versus reality and physical reality and so on and so forth. Very complicated stuff that we take for granted in our real world, or our everyday experience. Another pathway is focused very much on the way that we feel in the world, the way that we process emotion, the way that we process the energies that are forming all around us, the sort of hidden things that we can't see. So here we have a screen by Edvard Munch, maybe stuck in Norway during the winter. Here's the Elaine de Kooning, bullfight, obviously very abstract, but by the title we can kind of make out the action. But again, this type of painting is so focused on the immediate emotion of the artist and the expression of that, and the expression of a bullfight and how they interpret a bullfight. We can't really say what Elaine de Kooning feels about bullfights here, whether she's against them or for them or on the fence about them. Obviously, she's drawn to the energy of the interaction between humans and animals and ritual. There's a ritual aspect to bullfights, so we can infer a lot of things from abstraction. And then much of the latter part of the 20th century has been spent sorting through all of these different pathways and combining them and recombining them and regurgitating them and re-exploring avenues that got passed by the Cubists or the Impressionists. And so now we're in this sort of postmodern world where everything is art. And what if you make it, it's art, or is it? And we're still trying to figure that out, but I think the basic definition is there, that we're creating art. And then we have some new movements that came up. We have some performance art, and now we're starting to get into this territory where we're recombining all of these movements, and what we're really focused on now is the way that we experience the world. So we're combining sight, thought, and feeling in a more holistic kind of way to talk about the way we experience things. And this is one that focused on experience. And then we have also this by DFAC, installation artwork, where you're immersed by the artwork, where it's not a piece of something on a wall or a pedestal. You are part of the artwork, just as you are very much part of the world. So things are getting complicated, but also very, very interesting. And that's pretty much how the natural world is. It's very complicated, but it's very beautiful. So it's into this soup that I found myself in 1997 when I started school at Colorado State. Of course, I was required to take classes. This is not an art school. Its history is agricultural. And so I was required to take classes in all manner of different studies. So I became obsessed with patterns of connection, taking classes in history, mythology, anthropology, mathematics, physics. In all of these classes, I started to get this idea that there was a lot of things that were happening repeatedly throughout history. This is sort of a common sense no-brainer, I guess, but to a 19-year-old, kind of open door here. I loved all these patterns, the fact that so many cultures around the world are coming up with similar origin stories, or flood myths, or so on and so forth, and then the patterns of the sky and how so many cultures were able to pick stories out of how the stars moved, and there's a lot of magic in this for me. One of the most important patterns that was presented to me in our history class was the golden section. I'm not going to get into the golden section too much, other than the fact that for me, it was, obviously it's mathematical, but there's a very large, important anthropological aspect to the golden section, where a lot of our most famous art pieces conform. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because you can put this pattern on almost anything. If you scale it up or down, you can put it on anything. There's the golden section, there's the golden section, there's the golden section. It's everywhere, right? And to a young man or to a young woman who's interested in patterns and sort of trying to find meaning in the world, this becomes very important. This also has, like I said, a pretty historical pedigree. And under an air of being universally true. Like I said, you can put it on anything. But what was really important to me about this was that it connected the experience of existence to the structure of existence. So here we have a flower, and you can see the spiral in here. And you can see the spiral there. And you can see the spiral here. So if I use the spiral in my art, then it would, to my mind, make it undeniably good. Nobody could question it. Compositions would be perfect. So that's where I went with that for a while. Until, well, we'll get to it later, but at the same time, I was also obviously reading a lot, and I read, oh, here again, Mona Lisa. So there's a big part of me that doesn't think that Da Vinci said, I'm going to put the golden section together, and that's how I'm going to arrange the Mona Lisa. Because if you stretch this out a little bit, all of a sudden, all these intersections that they're making don't make sense anymore. Or if you put, you squeeze it in, it doesn't make sense anymore. So like I said, it's a matter of scale. Here's Kandinsky, and he wrote a book. He's kind of considered one of the first major non-representational abstractionists. This period of his work, he's he's naming all of his paintings compositions because he's wanting to reference music. And in his book on the spiritual in art, which is kind of a good read if you have time, he talks about his desire to make abstract art that can appeal to and be understood by a very wide audience of people, the general population, maybe people who are uneducated in art or unwilling at first to approach art like this. And that kind of struck me as well, that could be a project. So it doesn't take long when you're studying the golden section to get to fractals. And fractals really, really appealed to me because these were something that you could find in nature. And in fact, you do find them in nature everywhere. It just so happens that a lot of natural things take a spiral form, and they conform to the golden spiral. Again, our flower, our galaxies, so on and so forth. Now, there's a couple of really important things that I took from fractals. Not so much the imagery, but some very important concepts that come from fractals and its sort of sister field, chaos theory. The first is self-similarity of shape. So here, you see all these kind of repeating circles at different scales. So you have the idea of the macroscopic to the microscopic, having similar shape, life. So this is interesting. And now we'll take a look at the real world, and here we have some blood vessels, I think in a rat, retina. We have our trees displaying the same sort of interweaving and lacing. Here we have, this might be a good one to choose.
Oh, great. Yes, that's better.
This is obviously a very, 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 very large view of one part of the night sky. Now, what this is, these are filaments. We can't see them. We can only, our instruments can see them. But these are sort of pathways of energy passing through the universe. Of course, the scale of this is, these are trillions of light years apart. So this is extremely vast. Like, we cannot even imagine this. We cannot imagine it. So it's nice to have a picture. Now, these are all black holes. All these little things here. Every black hole, or most black holes, they shoot out. They take in, you know about black holes, once you go in, you can't come out. But they also shoot out streams of particles. And that all of these are lined up, basically, with the filaments of energy. So now there's something very, very interesting happening in the universe. And to me, what becomes important about all of this is that all of these self-similar forms give me sort of a visual proof of unification in the universe. That there is something that is unified and similar from the very, very smallest parts of my body to the very, very largest parts of our universe. And again, when you're trying to find meaning in the universe and locate yourself among society and all of that, this becomes very important. And a way to move forward. And so here we have weather patterns are a type of non-linear system. So this is chaos theory here. Non-linear system means that it doesn't go from A to B to C. What it means is that the initial conditions of a system totally control the pathway of a system. We know hurricanes, we see them, living in Florida especially, we see them. They come and they go, sometimes they die, sometimes they strengthen, and it all depends on the conditions along the way through time. So here we have this very static measurement, the golden section, the sort of static measurement of moments in time, coupled over actual nonlinear movement in the universe. But again, if we scale out, it doesn't make sense anymore. But interesting, very interesting in terms of pattern. Most importantly though, what these patterns mean to me, as they did then, they do now, is that they display the processes and the forces that are responsible for their formation. So all of a sudden there's a shift in my thinking. Well, I'm not so interested in the shapes of things anymore, but rather in the forces that are making them. And then, most important of all, is the function that these forces or that these shapes serve. And you can see that, especially with this series of images, all of these serve as pathways of energy, the exchange of energy. So the Exit Music series, which we see here, I've got two pretty important pieces. Oops. Two really important pieces to this series. This is the very first, and this is also not the very first, but in its own way the very first. So we'll talk a little bit more about those later. But the Exit Music series started as a fractal collage of an ocelot. I named this series Exit Music because this animal, although it's very prevalent in Mexico, there are certain areas of the world where it's highly endangered and in danger of extinction. And so the idea that there would be music as we exited the world sort of appealed to me in a romantic way. And so what I did is I came up with a way to make fractal collages where I photocopy an image at different scales, cut it up in a sort of random kind of way, and then glue it back down to make an abstract image. And so I had a lot of fun with these. And I used these as sketches to make larger paintings. And with this one in particular, I was really interested in all these dots, or the eyes, I guess. Because in the painting that I made, which I don't have a picture of, unfortunately, I had this technique where I was dripping paint into paint and making these really beautiful pools. And so I wanted to continue with that and see how else can I make this texture. There's got to be other ways. So I read a book, and lo and behold, rubbing alcohol resists water in acrylic paint, and it creates these beautiful sort of holes that reveal what's underneath. And so I can make this, and that, what was really great about this is that that's pretty random. You spray it on, and whatever happens, happens. And if you don't like it, well, you do what I did here. You start wiping away.
what, do you put the rubbing alcohol on with a sprayer?
You can use a dropper, but I had a spray bottle. And also the other important thing about it is that there's different, well, there's like 90% alcohol, 75% alcohol, I think 50 different levels of dilution, right? And they all do different things. The more alcohol, the more activity you're going to get. Now it's obviously depends very much upon how much water is in the paint, because it's the water and the alcohol that are doing the magic, not the paint. So this painting here is the very first of what is now the Exit Music series, and it began, as you can see, as one of the alcohol paintings. I didn't like what was happening, so I took a rag and I wiped it away. And any of you who have worked in a studio and make art, you know that there are moments where you have to stop what you're doing because something's going on and you want to pursue that in a different direction. And I also had a feeling that the alcohol was going to end up being sort of not a pathway for me, because I could see it being a very beautiful texture, sort of an understructure, an underpainting, but ultimately in itself, it wasn't for me. So what I did here is I wiped it away, and then I filled it in with some paint, because I liked what was happening with the form. And then it wasn't quite done, so then I used my brain, and I went back in time to university, where my favorite professor, the introduction to acrylic painting class, one of the lessons that we learned in there was using tape as a resist. You can put tape down, you can do it however you want, put some paint on, take the tape off, do it over and over and over again, so you have this really beautiful, kind of complicated lattice work of lines. It's cheap. And acrylic paint, you can do anything with acrylic paint. You don't have to worry about so much. You do have to worry a little bit about it, but not so much as oil where, oh my God, I have to wait for this to dry to do this next step. I live in Florida, it's August, and this thing is going till December. So, I thought, well, okay, let's just go with this and do the tape, and let's make it interesting and make these different widths and whatnot. And then the tape's on, put another layer over the tape, and then remove the tape. And then I started to see something that I really, really liked. Was that when these lines get closer and smaller, they start to, in a way, dimensionalize and interact with what is underneath it. And so there's this thing where, conceptually, we operate as humans, a lot of our belief systems operate in the same way, in a dualistic kind of way. And it could be a very biological thing too. Me, you, this, that. There's this sort of thing that we define ourselves and our space with this kind of thinking. And that's not a judgment. That's just kind of fact. But I liked how this started to gray that area a little bit, that there were some things, they were working together in a way. The this of the foreground and the that of the background, or object and space were working together. And then as it came here, it became quite evident that they were different, that one was on top of another. So there's kind of contradiction that was happening. So I've always kept this piece just because, it's the baby. Or the firstborn, I guess. I don't know. And that's how the series started. But crucially, and what I'm dealing a lot with now, a very important theme emerged, which was emergence. So this form is sort of emerging out from the background. And this was a very, very important theme to me, especially given the title of the series, which is Exit Music. And does everyone know what exit music is? No? Exit music is the music that is played when you're leaving a theatrical performance or a movie theater. It's some music you never pay attention to, you know, but its history is pretty interesting. It started, of course, with operas. I don't know when exactly, but before movie theaters, obviously. And the composers would spend a lot of time on this piece of music because they knew that the music would affect you as you were leaving this imaginary world. And that's what I took away from this, is that here we are 2 hours in this movie and beautiful, and you know, they fell in love, oh great, the world is perfect. And then when we're walking out back into the real world where everything's kind of messy and gray, things are still beautiful, kind of ugly, whatever. But there's that transition, that moment of transition was what I was really interested in. So all the work in this series is numbered sequentially, and it's very, very easy to track both conceptual changes and just formal approaches. So that's obviously what we're looking at. Here's another first where I'm starting to use shaped panels, trying to break away from the rectangle. But what's difficult about circular panels, especially when I'm using this form, is how to make them fit together. So it's pretty challenging. Another first here, where we have this swooping behind. It's sort of a different approach where you see this as sort of a little less complicated this one. This is also kind of the first painting where this background tape, I didn't have to do any modification to it to separate this sort of very, very low layer of the orange from these stripes here. The paintings previous to this I would have to go back in and kind of paint over because they didn't make sense, or like there wasn't enough spatial quality to it. This was one of my favorite paintings, and it was the first instance of overlapping of forms. Now what's really, really fun about this painting, not only visually but conceptually, is when you start overlapping things, you get this kind of dimensional form, which I really, really liked. So in a conceptual way, you know, things start getting really, really interesting in life when there's two people instead of one, or three people, and all of their energies start to converge and overlap. That's when life gets interesting, and in that way dimensionalizes. This painting was on display here in January of 2015 with my show with Yal Ford. And Catherine Bergman, who's not here, I wanted to thank her. But she's a great, wonderful person and curator, and she took a chance on me. I never had a show at a space like this, so I was very glad to have the opportunity. And Yal Ford and I talked together, and I had the big wall, but no big paintings, really big paintings. I knew that painting needed to be big. So this is my first large multi-paneled piece. And also what's interesting about this piece is the use of Spanish moss as a texture. You can't really see it here, but it's quite striking. And the other important part about this painting is where these forms overlap and you create circles. And all of a sudden the circle, this moment of convergence, becomes a theme in my work from now on, where I really like what happens there visually, but also in terms of the idea. And this painting is about the way we see. So here we have the full, color spectrum, and we just have the one kind of dimensional form. And then outside of peripheral vision, we don't really know what happens. We think we know, but the quantum world tells us differently. That existence or reality may not be the same as we see it, or until we see it. And then this finally, and then we'll move on, is an important piece because of the amount of time I took to deal with the negative space instead of just of these, and this becomes an important piece in the future too.
That last one was on, you said was on panels?
All the paintings are on masonite. And I do that because in order to build this sort of bottom diagonal layer first, and then I have to use a razor blade to cut all of that tape and cut all the tape off those forms and then reapply a new layer of tape for those. So considering this is 10 feet long, you can see that there's a lot of work in like canvas. If I cut a canvas, it's over, and I don't like that. Sorry, I just got lost here. So, this piece is important because I'm starting to think about, well, there's these forms and they're sort of on top of space. There's a background, there's still a background and a foreground happening here. What I really want to do is I want to integrate the form in this space. I want the forms to be in space. I want them to be like fish in water versus a boat on water. And so that's what I'm really dealing with here, because it's sort of, to me, a reflection of everyday reality, and it's intrinsic to my own life, and by extension, all of our lives. We all go through life choosing things daily, our whole life. We're given a couple of choices, and we take this path and those in meandering. And so this was beginning to think about taking that route in the studio. And also, personally, I'm wanting to, continue down the pathway of understanding the infinite. So when we look at that image of the galaxies and the black holes and just the absolute immensity of space, trying to imagine what that's like in my mind. And it's difficult, of course. But I want to embrace it, but I'm also kind of fearful that if I go too far, what would I lose? If I go down this pathway too far, will I lose my marriage and my family, or my house, or my mind? I mean, I'm not doing drugs or anything. We're just, it's hard to come back. It's hard to operate in a world when you are only thinking about how inconsequential everything is. But when we're not really inconsequential to each other at all, we're very important to each other. So there's still this conflict in my mind. And, how do I reconcile all of these things together? Because obviously they exist together, or, we wouldn't be here. So I know there's a third way, and the future of my work is going to help me figure that out, I hope. And my understanding, I think, is going to lie in really exploring the theme of communion. And so what we're talking about is communion of physical reality, temporal, emotional and mental experience, trying to piece all of these things together. Now, with these kinds of desires and fears and passions fueling me, we move on to a show I had in Tampa this summer at Hillsborough Community College at Gallery 221. The curator there, Patricia Shriram, was very kind to offer me this opportunity. It's an interesting space to work in. It also gave me another opportunity to really work large, do some big paintings, and really explore process and the intersection of process and idea. And so here we have this piece. Now the whole show centered around the idea of origin and what that means, and the service that origin offers to humanity. When we really examine origin, we start to see that, well, everything has an origin. And we get it really, very quickly, we run into the chicken and the egg. Right? What comes first? I don't know. What's this? Well, where did that come from? I don't know. This and this, you know. And so we have this kind of diagram that we're going to get to in a little bit here. But part of the one of the very important roles of origins is that it helps us make decisions. It helps us rationalize and justify and take action. And so I wanted to explore this as a theme for this exhibition and make some paintings where, you know, according to our very real experience of the world, everything has an origin. And a lot of times what we do to map origin is we use diagrams like this that are sort of like a tree. Except this one kind of makes me like the seed, and that's not true. These are all my descendants, so I like to turn this upside down. And all of a sudden, we get into a different area of thought, because now we're talking about roots. And roots are historically have been used in art and in narrative storytelling and the exploitation of origin for a very, very long time. They're an easy to follow kind of linear, logical system where we can trace descent, we can trace cause and effect. You know, if something bad happens, well, why did it happen? Well, let's look. You know, this happened and this happened, so it all came together and bad or good. But since we experience time sort of in a forward and backward kind of way, and not an up and down kind of way, we can turn it on its side. And all of a sudden we have sort of an easier to follow representation of people or events through time, as we read them, left to right. Of course, time includes not only the past and the present, but also the future. And we have to think, what does the future look like? And it often is presented to us, well, hypothetically anyway, the future is full of infinite possibilities. Oh, I forgot to get a, is there a napkin? Somewhere back here?
Yeah.
But why is, when you had it out the other way, why isn't that the tree of life with roots in either Kabbalist Judaism or in Buddhism?
Yep, we're getting there. So here we have, you know, a lot of times, though, even though our future may be hypothetically infinite, we have so many choices. I could be a pop musician, right? No. That's right. No. The way we're presented with choices is this or that. You can go this way or that way. I can not do it or I can do it. I can eat it or not eat it. So really, you know, we can erase most of this. I'll ask you to use your imaginations now. And our life sort of becomes a meandering sort of thing like that. Of course, we're not alone in the world. There's 7 billion of us. Everybody's pathways are meandering. Sometimes they cross, sometimes we join. for a while and leave each other. Sometimes my wife and I come together and we're going to run parallel for a while and decide to have a kid who has their own pathway. And sometimes our grandparents, where are they? Parent, okay. Sometimes they die. Pretty soon, we're left with a pretty tangled mess of interactions and choices, considering all the people that we run into. And now it starts looking a little bit less like a tree and a little bit more like what's known as a rhizome. Rhizomes grow not like trees exactly. So a tree has a seed, sprouts a trunk, from the trunk branches. A rhizome grows in every which way that it can all the time, like ivy. It's a little bit more opportunistic. It seeks advantage where it can. And so now, instead of a tree, the roots, we're dealing more with this sort of tangled mess, which is really what life is when we really examine life. Because origins are not clear. If we think about the way that our parents met, there's no clean story, except the one they tell us. But they're forgetting a lot of things that actually happened. They're forgetting about the people who introduced them. You know, there's a lot of things happening all the time that bring people together, that create origins. So there's no point, and origins are not points, because if we have to do that though. In order to understand things, we have to stop time to examine how things happened. But time doesn't stop, because all of these people continue through time too. So all of a sudden, your tree disappears. So that's kind of the idea. Except our experience of life is that there's both. So that's kind of where I've gotten to with my painting and with my sort of understanding of things and trying to reconcile all of this. So there's a fungus called a mycorrhizal fungus, the largest example of which is in Oregon. It spreads 4 square miles, and it's considered the largest living organism on the planet Earth. It's all one fungus.
Where is that again?
Oregon. I think it's in the Blue Mountains. I think. What's interesting about this fungus, is that there's sort of 2 systems going on. There's sort of a general fungus that runs under here, and then interacting between the roots and the fungus are what's called hyphae, or hyphae, and they feed the roots nutrients. Now these types of funguses are prevalent all over the planet, and what they do, their function is to help plants take up nutrients. Without these fungus, plants do not do well. This is something in gardening too, by the way, for gardeners. Look into this. It'll help your plants. So now we're going to go back into some metaphor here, using this as a metaphor for human experience and the convergence of linear logic, linear experience, which is our everyday kind of experience, and I don't want to say, higher reality or anything like that. There's no hierarchy here, just holistic reality, where our everyday experience, we can consider it as a type of abstraction, that we're taking piece out of here, stopping time so we can understand it, and then it goes back into holistic reality.
Your origin engines, you found them. And then currently on the website, and
It's on the new work page.
it's on the web page, okay.
Mhm.
About how many have you done?
That show had, let's see. We can run through the show real quick. So here we have the
This one,
painting,
yeah.
and this is, you know, the idea of origin
Mhm.
with the egg. But it's moving through time, so there's all kinds of fun stuff going on. And then this one, you know, these are those forms that you see in all of my paintings, except they're dissected and individualized. And the idea here was that, again, there's origins all over the place. People walking around, who knows who you're going to meet and what will happen from that interaction. So that's sort of the idea of the soup that we find ourselves in, that we experience all the time. And then every once in a while, we actually listen to something, and it all starts to come together up here.
Is that on Masonite also?
Yes. So this one's called reception. And after we receive stimuli, external stimuli, we have to concentrate it, think about it. And there's a point where we become awake to what we've been thinking about, what we've been processing. And at that moment, we're ready to announce to the world, in whatever way we do that we're going to do something. So this is called projection. We can do that in thought, we can do it in writing, we can say it, we can sing it, we can paint it. There's all kinds of ways. And here's a kind of, you can see how they were arranged. And then this is the big one here. It's 5 by 14 feet. And this is just action. You know, this is moving through the world. Nobody ever sees it, but there's a hand in there. And this body of work was another way for me to start referencing the human body with my work. And so here you see now some sort of megaphone. We have the idea of the third eye here, and an ear shape. And then I made a mandala out of all the trash, a year's worth of trash. So, you know, there's sometimes in life, like I was saying, where we feel inconsequential and life is meaningless and futile. We have some physicists telling us that we can only measure one property of a subatomic particle at a time. We can never know both its mass and its spin at the same time, which would lead us to believe that we can never ever know everything at once. We can never understand the totality of reality in a scientific way. Atoms themselves are 99.9% empty space, so everything that we feel is solid is not so solid. And so with this knowledge, we're asked to sort of consider our complacency and also our reliance on flesh and physicality. I just read an article too that there's a theory floating out there that the speed of light is not constant, as we believe for over 100 years, that it changes according to the planetary bodies or stars that it passes by because of gravity, because it's both a particle and a wave. So this kind of throws a lot of things up in the air. How far away is that fly? We don't know anymore. Or how long does it take to get from point to B? Well, we don't know yet. So there's some things in the world, and we won't talk about too many other recent events, but there's some things where we start to wonder. But when we diagram this, this isn't, and the reason I've been thinking about this a lot is because the show that I just showed you is very much about cause and effect. How do we move forward through space? Well, we do this, and we're pulling from a pool of ideas and feelings and so on. But ultimately, we have to reject a lot of that. And we have to choose one or this over the other. And that's how we move through the world. So this is a very real experience. It's not false, no matter how philosophical, or logical you put it. Because somebody gave me a paper after that show. Charles Parkhill is a very well-known sculptor in Tampa Bay, and his wife gave me a sort of a philosophical essay from the 60s, written by a guy named Deleuze, and I'm not sure, I forgot the name of the other writer, but they were arguing for the case of rhizome, that this was the only reality. And it didn't make sense to me. It's like, this can't be possible. Why are we always thinking about one thing over the other? And so I've been thinking, how can we put these two together? And this really, this time and time again, all you need to do is look at nature. And nature has already come up with the form to put two things together. It's not always efficient. It doesn't always work very well, but it works. And so now, we can use these things as a sort of metaphor when we look at art. We can look at art, since it's abstract, we can look at art as a sort of linear, logical system that helps us make sense of the world, helps us present ideas to each other. But we all come to it in this sort of kind of webby way, with our own interpretations and our own backgrounds and our own feelings. And with this art, there's got to be some sort of, when we look at fractal geometry, there's this self-similarity. We talked about it before. So I keep going through life thinking that, there must be something like this. Maybe it's a different form, but there's a self-similarity that's going to happen in the universe. What are the height of looking at art or interacting with people? Not physical, but something that's ephemeral. I think abstract art, and since we kind of talked about all art being abstract to a degree, all art is very powerful for its ability to connect us to deep, sort of hidden intuitions and connections, to large cosmological forces, or just, even to each other, one-on-one. Because of this power, art is always going to be relevant and necessary to our species.
Okay. I think we probably have some questions here, and I just have to remark, I feel like not only are you an artist, you're a philosopher, you're a physicist, and you're a botanist, and you're very, very diverse individual. So, how about some questions?
Are you making any money?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
Just like the diagram, it takes a diverse income stream to make money. I do sell my work, not often enough to make a full living. So I also work at Articles Art Gallery in helping promote their artists and their shows. I organize shows for them, sell work, and do all that kind of stuff. I have some other relationships with, for example, there's a company in Tampa that just got started, and they do art staging for multi-million-dollar listings. So I'm trying that out. And I've got a whole separate series of work that is realistic imagery. They're paintings and drawings of plants and reflections on water. And I go back and forth between the abstraction and those, sort of as a way to again, reconcile things and then just practice drawing.
A
So,
couple of fellows are twins that, probably about your age now, that have developed a concave canvas. Draw on that, and that can give dimension to what you do.
Yep, there's a lot of directions I could take. Yep. I have a show in Tampa next May where I'll start incorporating some digital, not imagery, but processes.
Any other questions?
When you're painting, you know, you're painting energy, basically, a form of movement and energy, and you have all these complex thoughts, are you able to let that go and just go?
Absolutely. I don't expect anyone to see this in the work. That's not my intention. I think the repetition, how we experience repetitive events, I think that's enough. I think that's enough of a reference to how the world works, how we connect to each other. These are just inspirations that I bring to the work. They're what I think about when I make it. But I'm not necessarily wanting to. I mean, there's better ways to look at things I'm talking about.
I just wanted to tell you how wonderful this was.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I
very
wanted
much.
to add,
Did you have a question?
I wanted to add the concept that I'm pulling together from this presentation. And I've known you quite a while. It's sort of like the person and situation. And some of the things you shared today help me understand that in a very real sense, you're reflecting the tempo of our times. You may not consciously be doing that. But when you said, why do we have to choose? That's been a big question for a year, right?
Sure.
So I just wanted to encourage you, to stay in the situation, because I think as an author, I can get lost in my characters. And I'll tell you, sometimes it's kind of scary. So I think having one foot in reality and staying in the situation, being able to express yourself in the way you have has been incredibly impressive to me. So I just wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. I think we all can agree with that.
Yes.
Any last?
I just had a couple of observations. Are you familiar with the shape of a red blood cell?
Yeah.
If you go back to the show, the paintings that you showed us from the show, the one, go back, more. That one, back, or whatever, that one looks like a side view of red blood cells. And so I was just curious as you were talking about incorporating things, images that had to do with the body. I don't know if you realize, but that's the origin
Oh,
of
yes.
that red blood cells from the
Well,
body.
And this also, we're going back to, there's an obvious reference to microscopic imagery here. A lot of people said bacteria, some people say hot dogs, okay. Bacteria, I've heard bacteria, blood cells, things like that. But, we can also see this as galaxies.
Yeah, so it's interesting how those shapes are.
So that was the idea, was that there would be this sort of openness to that painting where it could be anything, really. But the idea, the big takeaway here is that there's a whole lot of stuff floating around out there and we sort of have to choose.
The other thing I thought when you were talking about your drawing over there, about how all those connections, but if you just take a moment in time, if you stop time, then it's sort of you're taking a cross-section of that image, and that goes back to how you started out with the fractal images, with the alcohol, that you then got the cross-section with the the round pieces, which
Yeah.
I just thought,
Yeah.
maybe I'm going too far philosophically.
No, it's,
It's about, how, if you take a moment in time, we all look separate, but if you look at it from that direction, then there's all those connections.
well, now you're touching on something else too, that, you know, there's a lot of things we can get into with this, and one of those things is that our egos are, we sort of operate as points. You know, we're all points different from each other. But you can only really do that when you stop time. Because when we move through time, all of a sudden our relationships with people around us are constantly shifting. You know, so there's, like Belva, you were saying, you know, there's this real need to be both in that moment where you're responding to shifting things and you know, you have that awareness and willingness to be open to that, but also, you know, we need to hold on to some core, or we just kind of become that. You know.
Do I owe you the psychology exam here?
Yes.